speak a lot about stories and storytelling and how we should use the elements of storytelling and stories in our speeches. But I don't think I've really addressed when to use stories or how to use stories in your talk. And I am worried a little bit that some speakers think that you need to use a whole story every time. And it's this very linear thing, and it can really bog down a talk to use too many complete linear stories. Then it just becomes, just a whole bunch of, and this happened and that happened and he said and then she said, and it just kind of goes on and on and on. So I'd like to share maybe some best practices around how to use full stories and how to use storytelling elements to bring your talk to life. So there are two primary ways that we use stories in a talk typically. And one is to use one story, one kind of overarching story, and to hang information off of that story. So if I'm doing a TED talk, but I want to share some life lessons learned, I might have this one overarching story of the particular point in my life, and then I'm going to hang the different life lessons off different parts of that story. That's one way to do it, is to use the overarching story and then embed the information within that. The other way is to do the opposite. So maybe I have my 5 steps to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, let's say. So I've got my 5 steps to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, and then I hang a story off of each step. So maybe I have a story at the beginning about why I love mountains and why I wanted to climb Kilimanjaro in the first place. And then I'll have each step has a story with it. So maybe how I got my equipment, or a challenge I came across along the way, or a success story, or, just different examples. So the story becomes a way of illustrating the point of information. So it's more about the information, and the stories are secondary, and they're kind of hung off the scaffold of the information. Those are the two primary ways that we use stories. The other really common thing that we often do, and this is a really effective thing to do, is to start with a story, especially if it's kind of a metaphor for what we're talking about. Begin a story, the audience thinks that story is over, and then to bring the end of that story in right at the end. So we start with something, we talk about, climbing Mount Kilimanjaro and how it changed my life. And then, I have all this information, all these little stories. And then I have something about after I came down Kilimanjaro that you didn't know I was going to share. And it just brings the ends together, and it bookends things very nicely. And that's wonderful for creating a sense of completion and that kind of bing, aha moment at the end of a talk. That can be very useful as well, to use one story, kind of half of one at the beginning and half of it at the end, as a bookend. Usually you have to kind of let the audience think that it's done. You don't want them to be thinking about it while the rest of the stuff's going on. So it's got a kind of faux ending and then a true ending right at the end. So those are the ways to use kind of more traditional whole story. So that's a story of the beginning, a middle, and an end. It has an arc, and it may have characters or whatever, but it's kind of got, it's got a context, it's got a starting point, something happens, and then there's an ending. And those can be long, or those can be very, very short. That's not so important. But the thing is they're always kind of complete, and there's always a movement, a beginning, a middle, and an end. But you don't always need to use a full story. You don't always have to have like bump, 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 bump all the way through the talk. You can use just pieces of storytelling just to highlight something. So, for example, you might use imagery to highlight a decision that you made when you're talking about, life lessons that you've learned. You might just use just an image and not tell the rest of the story ever. And it's not important because it's just about that image. Or you might bring in character voice when you're doing a quote, when you're quoting somebody, or maybe you're talking about, intrusive voices in your head. And every time I use an intrusive voice in my head, I use a different voice because I want to separate it from who I am. Maybe you're doing that. And that's not a story, but that's definitely character. You know what I mean? So we're bringing in elements of character, we're bringing in elements of atmosphere, tension, imagery, metaphor, simile, to sometimes to highlight something or to make information more relatable. Maybe instead of, talking about, wow, this was a really big challenge, I might talk about how this was a mountain of a task. The mountain was so tall that the top of it was hidden in clouds, and birds weren't even flying all the way up to it. I'm not going to talk about the mountain again. Maybe I'll bring that metaphor up a couple of times, but it's not about me climbing the mountain necessarily, unless I'm talking about the 5 steps to climb Kilimanjaro, then I guess it is. But it's just a metaphor for something, just to bring it to life a little bit more. So we don't always need to tell a linear, this happened and this happened and this happened story. And I have spoken in other videos about how we don't want to tell a story like that anyway. We don't want to say, this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened. That's a very boring story. We want to leave out all the unnecessary parts. And sometimes the unnecessary part is the story. And we just want to bring in some character. We just want to bring in some vibrancy of language. We just want to bring everything to life a little bit. But having at least one story, either this overarching story or a story at the beginning and the end, like a bookend story, or having little examples peppered through your talk. That's ideally how we're going to be using storytelling. And one of the reasons imagery and character and those kind of things are so important is because it's not just bringing the talk to life from your end, although it is. It's also bringing the talk to life for the audience, because you're tapping into images and memories that you don't even know what's in there. Because we connect things, we connect images, we connect ideas, we connect feelings without being very conscious about it. And so when you start to bring up metaphor and imagery, you're bringing texture to your side of the talk, but also the audience is engaging, and they're filling in the colors and they're filling in the details from their own experience, from their own stories, from their own dreams, from their own lives, from their own characters in their lives. And so it becomes this collaborative thing, and it's much more engaging. They're going to remember it better because they can relate to it now. They have something in their lives that they're bringing to your information, and so they can connect with it. Because information doesn't really stick with human beings unless it has some emotion encapsulating it, some emotion attached to it in some way. And storytelling, bringing in imagery or metaphor or something visceral, something physical that we can connect to, is one of the easiest ways to bring emotion, to connect it with information so that it really stays with your audience. I hope that made sense. It's kind of a weird topic. It's a bit ephemeral to take these different elements out without getting too technical and without talking forever. But I wanted to say that because we do sometimes get bogged down in the details. And it's not necessarily about that. Sometimes it's just about highlighting something, bringing a little bit of extra spice or color. And it doesn't need to be a full story. You can use just an element of it, just a small piece, and it will work just as well. So I hope that was useful. I look forward to hearing your stories and just your more vibrant, vivid, informational talks as well, because language is a beautiful, complex, textured thing. And the more you can play with your language, the more fun you will have, and the more engaged your audience will be. Until next time.